To start, we'll double-click on the Launchpad icon. And this icon is going to launch a program called Launchpad, of course, and really think of it as the container that holds all of your various T-Metrix applications. Now, for an agent, there'll typically be one or maybe two applications in the Launchpad application. The first one is the agent module, and this is what you're going to launch every day. This is how we change our status to available to get calls, or if we need to step away, we can change it to any non-available status. And then the second icon down here, this is for the SIP soft phone. This is actually how we're going to be answering the phone calls that route to us, and also how we would make outbound calls, or really even receive any direct inbound calls as well. So this is not a requirement. It could be that you're set up to use Skype for Business. That would not be held within Launchpad. That'd be a separate application. Or maybe you're even using a third-party phone. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll train on the soft phone for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's the preferred method, and also it makes it a lot easier to actually show incoming calls because we can record it in the actual video training. So I'll start by clicking on the ACD agent module. Notice the little play symbol that tells me that it's starting. And we've now launched the agent module. Now, because I have the soft phone installed and the applications are tied to each other, it auto started the soft phone as well. And we'll spend some time talking about each of these applications, but we'll start by going through the agent module in a bit of detail. So we've used Launchpad to open these applications. We really don't need it again. We might use it later if we closed an application, needed to relaunch it. But really, that's the only time it's needed. So I'll go ahead and click the X here. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually log into the application. Now, in the title bar here, we can see my logon name. Yours might look different depending on your unique setup, but your logon name in some form will show there. It also will show here under username. I'll go ahead and click the login button. And this will start the login process. It'll tell me the last time that I've logged in. That'll go away on its own, or you can click the OK button. And we've now launched the application, and you'll notice that we're immediately moved to a status of available. So if you're a non-supervisor, that's always going to be the case. As soon as we hit login, we'll drop into the available status. And what that means is we are now available to start taking phone calls, or really any other media types that might route to us. If I needed to move my status to some non-available, I could say, okay, well, I'm going on break. I click on break, and then I hit change. Your list is going to be specific to your organization, so all of that is customizable. Really, the big takeaway for the status is that if you're in the available status, you are available to take calls or other incoming contact types. And if you're in any other status, you're not available to take contact types. And those statuses simply give your supervisor information about who's logged in and available and who can take calls and who's not. So here I've clicked available, and now I need to hit the change button to actually make the status change from on break to available. So it is a two-step process there. And we'll notice below it actually reflects here. I see my own information just like a supervisor would see my information. So I see only myself. Supervisor would see additional information there on any agents that they manage. All right, so we know how to move ourselves to available. The next piece that we'll look at is under call statistics. And again, I mentioned that I only see information about myself. I'm going to see my extension, any of the skills that I participate in, and then I'm going to see whether I'm ready, or again, if I'm in some other status, I'll see that information here as well. There are some timers. These are simply telling me how long I've been idle. I haven't been on a phone call now for a little over 2.5 minutes, and I've been in the available status now for approaching 1 minute. As far as the other columns, these really deal with your individual call statistics. So I can see that I've just logged in to start the day and I have no ACD calls. And if I had some, it would tell me my ACD average on how much time I'm spending on each call. I do see that I did take 2 non-ACD calls. That simply means I either called out or someone called into me directly earlier when I had the software open, in fact. And then again, we have non-ACD average for those as well. So you get an average for ACD calls and an average for non-ACD. And then the rest of the columns deal with mostly the other object types like emails and chats, video calls, Facebook, tweets, SMS, etc. The only other one is the status details, probably worth pointing out, and the call display. Status details is what I can type in here. So if I'm working with a particular customer, I can say working with customer A, and if I hit enter, it's going to show in my status details. What's nice about that is just like a supervisor can see my status, they can also see my status details. So this can be really handy in some environments where maybe you're sharing resources or you're working with obviously the same group of customers. Someone else might get a call from the same customer and they know at this point, oh, another agent's already working on that. I'm going to instant message them and find out what the status is. So that can be helpful. If you want to clear it, just hit the X and it'll clear from yours, and then also update any of the supervisors that are monitoring the contact center. All right, so scrolling back to the left here, one other thing I'd like to point out is that your status, the only one that's going to be green is available, and then anything else, so like if I go to on break, notice that's yellow. So really, I think of that as meaning green means go, right? If I'm available, if I'm green, I'm ready to get calls. And I'll show you how that can change color in a particular instance later as well. But before we jump into that, we'll look at the bottom section here. And so we looked at our individual call statistics. Down here are all the skills that I participate in. So I can handle operator calls, I can handle some various sales calls, and I'm going to drag this down a little bit here and drag this up. So you can change your real estate a little bit to make it fit however your screen works best. And here I can see support and some other skills that, again, that I participate in. So what's nice about this is as an agent, I can see that we have 7 agents actually available right now. And I can see whether there's any calls in queue for any of these various skills that I handle call skills or queues that I handle calls. If there were any, I would see a counter telling me how long the oldest call has been waiting in queue. And then I see some of the same types of information that I see on my individual level, but at a group level. So I can see wait averages, I can see any messages that might be in the system, I can see how many emails are in queue, chats are in queue, and then I get totals as well. So for this particular one here, we can see support, by the way, now has 6 agents available. And we can see that there have been a total of 24 calls, and all 24 have been answered. There's been no abandons. So once again, I can scroll, and a lot of the same types of information. We do get a little more detail on things like the average speed of answer for the group, and then whether we're meeting our service level agreements or our SLAs. And then the other fields, as we had above, these are really dealing with these other channel types. So how many emails, chats, all those sorts of things can be represented here as well. And moving our way down the screen, we have 2 buttons. We have a messaging button and an emergency button. The emergency button really does something similar to the messaging button. It really just, you hit it and it alerts any of your supervisors that you've got something going on at your workstation. And that might be maybe an irate caller or something that you just want a little bit of help on quickly. You can hit that emergency button. They get notified about your position needing some help, and they can instant message you back. And speaking of instant messaging, we do have messaging built into the application. Here I'll click on the messaging button, and we'll notice here that it says we don't have any open conversations right now. Well, that's great. I can hit a new conversation, and here I happen to be able to message any of the other agents or supervisors directly. That's going to depend on your configuration. That might be locked down to only be able to message supervisors, so that's going to depend on your configuration. Again, in this case, I can actually message people individually, or I can message supervisors of all of my queues and skills that I work in. So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and just message someone directly, and we're going to write, hello, we need a little help. I guess there's no we, I'll say hello, I need some help with a caller. Are you available? And I can hit enter or send, and we've now started an instant message conversation. And I can see that Ryan is actually typing back to me here, and he says he is. Okay, great. Well, I'll let him know we're just training and thank him for his time. But you get the idea. We can message back and forth here and start a conversation. We could even have a group conversation going if you're set up that way. We'll show you that next. So I'll actually close this one out. If I needed to restore it, I can actually come back up here and revive the conversation, any that I had open and closed or just a specific one. So that's a really handy feature. And then also I can do a new conversation, and we can, if you have permissions to do so, again, that may depend, you can either join rooms or create rooms. And basically that's just a chat room. So we can create a room. We'll go ahead and do that as well. This is a test room for training. You can set it as moderated or unmoderated. Basically, you can read about how that works, but basically moderators have the control to kind of flow the conversation and add people, remove people, etc. And then you can also set the room as public or private, so that you notice there was a join button before. We may want folks to be able to just join in. Maybe we're talking about an ongoing issue that we want to address for our customers, or maybe we need something more private between a manager or two and myself. So either one of those could be used. Again, whether this is available is going to depend on your configuration setup, but we'll give a quick overview here. So if we want to start a topic, we can do that. And I'm just going to say training example and hit create chat room. And now it works much like other chat type programs. I can hit the invite button. And again, anyone that I have permissions to work with in my shared skill sets, I can start adding in. So in my case, I'll try a couple of people. We already did Ryan, so we know he's probably available. We'll just hit several people and invite them. And as they receive invites, they'll start adding to the room, and now we can actually all chat with each other. So a really great way to collaborate if there's something going on that takes more than one or two people. So we have two folks in. I'm going to say, howdy folks. This is a training video. Thanks for your help. And there's a lot of really neat features in here. We won't dive into all of them, but if you hit /? and enter, it'll give you all sorts of little shortcuts that you can use. So here we can see a couple of people replying right now, and we could hop out of the room. In our case, we can mute or unmute people. We can make a new person a leader if we needed to, since we did set it up as a moderated room. But that's the general idea of the messaging. So I'll go ahead and hit leave room now, and we'll move on. So next we'll look at what to do in the case of an issue. And what we do here is we click on help and then send trouble report. Type in your name, email address, and whether the issue happened in the last 30 minutes or not. That helps the team look through the debug traces and kind of have an idea of where they're looking. And then type in a brief description of the actual trouble. So in this case, we might say, I am available, but calls are not routing to me. I see calls in queue. And then we can go ahead and email, or I can call Teammetric support, or I can say, hey, I'm not going to call Teammetric support. That's probably not a great option unless it's not super time sensitive. If it's more time sensitive, then go with either the calling or the emailing. I'll go ahead and say, this is a training demo. Please ignore. I don't want anyone actually spending time looking through this. I'll hit this option, and that'll open up an email on my side to then send an actual notification on top of the file that's automatically sent. And that email will open in another window, but basically it'll be addressed to the team and have the description information in there, as well as any of the other pertinent form information that was filled out. So I won't hit send in this case, again, because we're just doing this for training purposes, but that would, of course, send over to the team to start reviewing. All right, so that's a pretty good overview on the actual agent application itself. I'm going to go ahead and change my status to available, and we can see that we are now in the available status. And now we'll spend just a few minutes going through the softphone application, and then we'll actually drive some calls in and work through some of the normal behavior of when a call comes through the system. So here, I'm going to actually just dial out to another extension. So I'm going to type in an internal extension. Yours may be different based on 4 digits or 7 digits or 10 digits. And I hit the enter key, and now we've dialed into a conference bridge that we can hear in the background. I'll turn that down. So in this case, we see that my status is showing available, but it's blue, and the state is on a call. So even though it's not a contact center call, it's important that the system know that I'm on a call so that it doesn't try to route me any ACD calls while I'm in the available status. And I'd mentioned earlier that this could change to a blue. It will change to a blue when we're already on a call. So if I hang up over here, we'll notice that my state immediately goes back to idle, and my status, available status color, changes from from blue back to green. All right, so a little bit of a, again, overview of the softphone. Here we have our basically directory, and depending on how you're set up, that might automatically tie into Outlook or Active Directory. We'll look at that in just a minute. And then we have our call logs. We can see that we've only had one outgoing call to the conference bridge. If it's a number that you haven't worked with before, you can elect to add it to your phone book over here, and that's what this little plus icon's doing here. So if I click it, it opened up a new window that says add contact. I could make that be obviously whatever I want. I can change a picture and then save that. I don't want that in my contact list, so I'll hit cancel, but it would then show up over here. And then we can also favorite it so that it always kind of shows up in this main view here, and that's why we're seeing these this way, because I can actually search for other people as well in my listing, and we can see here I found a couple of different folks that aren't showing up in my main view. It's simply because they're in my directory, but they're not favorited. And again, hit this box here, and I can see that this individual has a couple of different phone numbers, and I can also add the contacts to my favorite list. Okay, so that's how the directory works. That's how the call log works. And then the last icon that we have here in this little tool strip is our dial pad. And here, again, this is where we see all of the dial information. I can type numbers in here, and that works, or I can type them in here. I would also use this form more likely if I'm dialing into a system that says press 1 for this or 2 for that. I wouldn't want to type those numbers in here. I would want to enter them in here. And I'll give a quick example of that. So in this case, I'm going to, again, dial into that conference bridge that we heard earlier. And I'll turn that up. So here I could enter in a conference bridge using these buttons. Now I entered in an invalid conference bridge, so it's alerting me to that. But that's where you would typically use this if I were calling into a voicemail system or into a conference bridge or an IVR or anywhere where you might need to input keystrokes or DTMF. All right, so the next thing that we'll talk about here is actually handling a call, and we'll do that now. So I'm going to dial in from another phone. Okay, great. So we see that I'm getting caller ID and name information. I'm going to turn that volume down a little bit. And I have a couple of options here. I can answer the call or I can decline. Well, in my case, of course, I want to answer the call. And I've now answered that call. Now, once again, I see the on-call information showing up here in my state. I see that I'm on a phone. I see that my status is blue, available, instead of green, like we talked about earlier. So all of that matches up for receiving a call as well. Now this call did not route through the ACD, and that's why I don't see any other information showing up here, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Instead, we know that the call came in directly, and we could hang up the call at this point. We could put it on hold. We can resume. I could do a transfer of a call. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to send it to another extension. I'll hit enter now that I've typed that number in. Now, nothing's actually happened yet. It's basically presenting me with some routing options. I can conference into that extension. I can do a cold transfer, which means that it's just going to blast the transfer out to that person. I could do a warm transfer. That simply lets me introduce the conversation. So I could say, hey, I have so-and-so on the other line. Do you want me to transfer you? Or I could make a new call if I wanted. So maybe I don't want to transfer at all. Maybe I want to put that call on hold and actually perform a new call. Most of the time, most organizations are going to use the warm transfer option. And I'll go ahead and do that now. So I'll hit warm transfer. So we can see here that this little box pops up, and it gives me information about what's going on. So we can see that I've got this particular caller ID is who called me originally, and I'm transferring here. Now it's just ringing in the background. So that's why the only option I have right now is release. At some point, we'll assume it'll go into voicemail, and I'll have some other options pop up for me here. So we'll hang tight just for a second. All right, great. So the voicemail just answered. So I could either start the conference at this point or the warm transfer, complete the transfer. So I will do that, and we're done. We just performed our first transfer, so pretty straightforward. We'll do that again just for practice. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and bring another call in to the soft phone. Great. So again, we see the caller ID information. Again, it's not coming through the ACD. We'll hit answer, and we can put it on hold. We can resume, and then again, whenever we're ready, we can transfer the call. So I'm going to type the extension in and hit enter. I'm going to do a cold transfer this time. Now notice it just popped right through. So my caller is just hearing ring back because it hasn't actually gotten through to voicemail yet. So that's where you'd want to be aware of whatever kind of practice you want to do there. And as I mentioned earlier, warm transfers are a little more common for most organizations. So that's more or less the gist of the soft phone and how it's used. The next step here will be to actually show a call coming through the contact center. All right, so through another phone, I have a call that's navigating through the IVR. I'm going to go ahead and make a key press to bring a call in. All right, perfect. So here we actually see an ACD routed call, and we can tell a couple of different ways. We see hold time information here, as well as the skill set that it came in on, and we see the same information over here. Additionally, we see the caller ID information. So I'm going to go ahead and hit answer, and we've now answered our first contact center routed call. Again, the big note there is that we see this new information, the skill information, any hold time, and caller ID type information. And we wouldn't get that if it was a direct call into our soft phone application or into a Skype for Business or a physical phone, whatever it is that we might be using to handle calls. But if it's a contact center routed call, we will get that information. And in particular, I really like the hold time because if this were 3 minutes or 5 minutes or even 10 minutes, we know we've got some work to do right up front, maybe doing a little de-escalation with the person who's calling in because we know they've been waiting a long time. Now, in this case, we brought this call in and there were no calls in queue. I was calling into a demo queue, so of course there was no wait there, and that's where we see the 0 seconds. And then from here, everything really works exactly how it worked previously, which is I can put the call on hold. I can end the call. I can perform a transfer, and then really that's the gist of it. So in this case, I will go ahead and do a transfer to that same extension that I was testing with before. So I'll enter it in and press enter, and we'll go ahead and do a warm transfer once again. And again, because we chose warm transfer, it won't let me blast this through until the other end picks up. And the other end is still ringing, and that's why we don't see the option to complete the transfer. So the system is smart enough to know, hey, they haven't answered on the other side. We shouldn't give them the option to complete it because they want to do a warm transfer. In this particular case, since we looked at that earlier, I'll go ahead and hit release, and I can actually bring the call back, take it back off a hold, and I could try a different extension. Just in case maybe that person wasn't available, or maybe they answered and said, hey, I can't help with that. Can you get somebody else? We just simply release it, and then we try a different extension. I'm going to hang up the call in this particular case, so we'll hit end call, and notice everything clears, and we are back to green available, very important, and ready for our next call. Customer callbacks offer methods whereby callers can leave a message for agents. Customer callbacks are similar to voicemail, but the messages are routed directly to agents, similar to calls. In fact, callbacks can be delivered a few different ways. First, when there are no longer any calls in queue. Second, they can be retrieved manually by select agents. And third, and the most common way, is that a callback holds its place in queue. Imagine a caller learns that there are 10 calls ahead of them, and they don't want to wait in line. So they choose to leave a callback, but their place in queue is virtually held, meaning that as each caller is handled, their message moves along in queue as if they had stayed on the line. Here, I'll go ahead and change my status to available so that I can demonstrate retrieving a callback message. So a callback message is being delivered to my position. I can see information like the skill set that it's assigned to and caller ID information as well. Notice that most of the options are disabled. So really the first step here is that I need to listen to the message. I could place the message back in queue if I realized maybe I'm logging off for the day or getting ready to go to lunch. I could also download a copy of the message. That could be useful if I need to send it to my supervisor. In this case, I'll go ahead and say, let's listen to the message and start the process. So it immediately begins ringing my phone. In my case, I'm using the T-Metric soft phone. It could be another soft phone or a physical phone, of course. I'll click answer. And I'm being instructed to press any key to hear the message. So I'll go ahead and press 1. And the message should begin playing to me as the agent now so that I can hear it and then take notes or respond to it and do whatever I need to do to handle that. Once I'm finished listening to the message, you'll notice that quite a few of these options become enabled. The customer unavailable and the customer called, that simply ends the transaction and clears the customer callback so that I can handle additional phone calls or callbacks or whatever else might be routed to me. And really the only difference here is how things are being stamped in the historical records for supervisors to run reports. So I'll click customer called. That just marks it that way in the reporting. And notice that I'm immediately green, available, and ready to handle the next interaction. There are times when, as an agent, I want to allow a caller to reach me directly, but only for a specific amount of time. This is most often useful in situations where I'm speaking with someone and we need to chat again to finish up some kind of transaction. Maybe the caller needs to provide me with dates for a booking or an appointment, but we have everything else already sorted out. In a case like that, it probably makes sense for them to be able to reach back to me without first routing to another agent. But I don't necessarily want to provide my direct number. Instead, if I'm logged in and available, we want them to be able to come to me first. This is where an agent callback comes into play. You can find this option under Edit, Agent Callbacks. If I were on an ACD routed call, this section would not be adjustable. The agent callback would be assigned to the skill of the call I'm handling. In this case, I'm handling an outbound call, so I can select the skill set to associate the next inbound call with. Other than that, I select a valid time period for the callback and also enter in some helpful notes. Once I have everything set, I can request the agent callback number and PIN by clicking the Request Agent Callback Number button, and then relay the information to the caller. In this case, I would give them the callback number as well as a callback PIN. Once the caller is ready to chat with me again, they will call this number, enter the PIN, and route directly to me. Here we can see the agent callback is being delivered to us. We'll go ahead and answer. And of course, we see the notes that we entered in previously to help us complete the transaction. All right, so we've kind of gone through the process of handling some calls, and we've looked at the different grid information for an agent. Really, the next step is when we're finished at the end of the day, what do we do? And here, just like we changed our status from the status dropdown before, we can click that. And the bottom option, remember, available is always on every system. All of these are custom. And then the last item will be on every system as well. So I'll hit logged off, and I can hit change. And the system has logged me off. And now at this point, I just close the agent module. And then if I'm using the soft phone, I can close that as well. And yes, we know that that's going to prevent us from answering phone calls. We're good with that. We'll hit yes. It'll tell us this is performing a little cleanup. That sometimes can take a moment or two. And once that's closed, then we can shut the system down or whatever we need to do from there. And that completes the training for the standard agent. We have some other videos that cover more advanced features for some of the various omni-channel routing as well.